Welcome to Ideas in Action, a television series about ideas and their consequences. I'm Jim Glassman. This week, cybersecurity. Is the U.S. prepared for a catastrophic cyber attack? Joining me to explore this topic are Siobhan Gorman. She's a national intelligence reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Jeff Moss, a former hacker. He is the founder of the Black Hat and DEF CON cybersecurity conferences. He is currently a member of the U.S. Homeland Security Advisory Council. And Melissa Hathaway, former acting senior director for cyberspace at the National Security and Homeland Security Councils. The topic this week, cyber threats to our national and economic security. How vulnerable are we? This is Ideas in Action.
Funding for Ideas in Action is provided by Investors Business Daily. Every stock market cycle is led by America's never-ending stream of innovative new companies and inventions. Investors Business Daily helps investors find these new leaders as they emerge. More information is available at investors.com.
It's the great irony of our information age. The very technologies that empower us to create and to build also empower those who would disrupt and destroy.
Almost a year after the Obama administration outlined its cybersecurity strategy, most experts agree that America remains exposed to cyber attack. Past breaches of national security reveal just how vulnerable we are. Viruses have been placed in Defense Department computers, secret plans for fighter jets were released on the internet, and the military was even tricked into purchasing hundreds of counterfeit servers. What can be done to safeguard the U.S. against cyber warfare, and how real is the threat? Siobhan, what are some of the actual instances of hacking that have occurred, and how serious are they?
Well, I think that so far what we've seen are a lot of exploratory hacking efforts, things that were surveilling different kinds of systems. One that was described to me was one that had gotten a number of intelligence officials a little bit alarmed, which was what appears to be Chinese and Russian surveillance of the electric grid, where they also leave behind little pieces of software that would allow them to manipulate or destroy components of the systems in the future. We've also seen lots and lots of government secrets, military secrets. The F-35 fighter jet had its designs stolen by what it appeared to be Chinese hackers. So there have definitely been a number of incidents, but so far they seem to largely be espionage or what military folks call preparation of the battlefield, which would mean putting items in place that would allow activities in the future that could be quite damaging. Preparation
of the battlefield. I mean, this sounds like leaving behind, I don't know, bombs or even nuclear devices, let's say on American soil, that could be blown up when it's to the advantage of an antagonist. I mean, is that what's going on right now?
I like to think of it as it's a presence that sits within our networks, and whether it's organized crime that has put the presence in your network, or a hacker or an agent of another country. Their motives are very different in what they're trying to achieve. Some are trying to just steal money. Some are trying to illegally copy your intellectual property. And some perhaps are laying the groundwork for future operations if there were, in fact, a time of war.
But I think it's classic hacker behavior. I mean, this is since the dawn of time. If you broke into a network and you spend a lot of time and energy, you want to make sure you can come back later. You don't have to repeat that task every single time. And so hackers got very good at leaving back doors and rootkits to make sure that they could come back at a later date. I think this is just other people doing the exact same thing.
But do hackers also want to leave behind something to show that they're there? Is it kind of personal?
They don't want to be detected. Being detected means you get kicked out. And so they spend a lot of time trying to be very stealthy and not detectable.
But it seems to me that the most troubling story that I've read, and I know you've written about this, is this story about, leaving behind software that could actually destroy the electric grid in parts of the United States.
Some people call them logic bombs, and I mean, it's analogies that have been described to me would be, you know, like almost planting little, you know, actual bombs, say, alongside the highway, but they couldn't, you know, they wouldn't be detonated immediately. It would be in the instance of a crisis or some kind of conflict where it was to the advantage of those who had planted those little bombs to actually, quote unquote, detonate them. In the case of the electric grid, it's a little bit tough to judge exactly how much damage it would do because there are so many different intertwined computer systems that control the electric grid that they would definitely have to get key components of it to really take electrical systems down. But I think that what has alarmed the government people I've talked with about this is that it seems so pervasive that they don't necessarily even know how much damage could be done.
Are there simulations going on now so we can figure out what damage would be done to the electric grid under these circumstances?
I know that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is working closely with the North America Electricity Reliability Corporation. FERC is the federal regulators, NERC is the industry group that meets to the standards to ascertain how one would ensure the reliability of the grid if any other part of the grid were to go down.
Don't the Chinese, I've heard, Jeff, have a kind of a core of, maybe they're volunteers, maybe they're paid, but it's really thousands and thousands of hackers who are either operating on instruction or kind of somehow being inspired to do things.
Yeah, it's like a patriotic hacker movement, and you see this in Russia as well, and to some extent the United States. I think most countries have a core of sort of patriotic hackers, South Korea versus North Korea, but it seems to be more formalized in China.
So, Siobhan, I mean, it's clear that there's a threat here. Why was it so difficult for the administration to find a cybersecurity coordinator?
Well, I think that there was a lot of debate within the administration about exactly what role this person would play, and there was a lot of debate and really battling going on between the National Security Council and the Economic Security Council, and I think that after a while it became very difficult to recruit people to a job where they could see that there was going to be this inherent tension, and that means that when you take the job, you are inheriting sort of these pre-positioned battles, and it was also not clear, I think, to a lot of people who were considering the job, how much authority this person would have from the White House. Would they really be able to direct federal agencies to do things? Would they really be able to control the purse strings?
Is, Melissa, you have personal experience along these lines. Do you agree with that?
I think that the position that we recommended in the cyberspace policy review had to report into both councils because many of the initiatives that are being—
You mean economic and national security or homeland security?
No, National Economic Council and the National Security Council. And why is that? Because many of the president's initiatives, smart grid, digitizing the health records and the reform of our health IT, the reform of our air traffic control system, air traffic management, and moving broadband to every household in America all require a security component, but all of those initiatives are led out of the National Economic Council. And without having somebody who's responsible for ensuring the security of those initiatives, we could in fact make the whole nation more vulnerable by only thinking about it as an economic initiative versus a national security initiative.
So the threat is really in both areas. The threat is to the U.S. economy as well as being almost a classic military threat.
Well, I mean,
right?
This is how our country does business. We do it online now. And so any threats to how we do business online is an economic threat. I
mean, I just want to be clear how bad it could be. Could hackers go into all the accounts of a large bank and just wipe them out completely?
Well, so you could quickly go down this road of a parade of horribles, all the bad things that can happen. And when you look at who's actually attacking us, you get their motives. Organized criminals need the network to be up because they need the internet to work to steal from us. Nation states need the network to be up to steal secrets and to perform covert operations. There's very few groups that need the network to be down. So when you start talking about cyber war and the network coming down, it's kind of it's an edge case. It hasn't happened yet because everybody who's playing on the internet right now needs it to be up to perform their tasks.
I want to get back to this policy question. I mean, what can a cyber czar actually do to protect all these computers in the United States? I mean, if individuals are vulnerable to phishing and other kinds of techniques that can extract their information, what can somebody in Washington do to change that?
What the main challenge the federal government is facing is not only is it worried about protecting its own networks, but it's got to think through this problem of the vast majority of the computer networks out there, many of which the government relies on, many of which we rely on for things like power and all kinds of other critical activities, are in the private sector. The government doesn't have direct control over that, and so there's been this dance that's been going on now since there's been sort of a more serious discussion about cybersecurity of, well, what is really that relationship? And particularly because in the US government, the National Security Agency, which is an intelligence agency, has the greatest amount of expertise in this area, but people are very cautious and careful about getting an intelligence agency too involved in not only domestic affairs, but private affairs, because that raises all kinds of questions about surveillance society and things like that. So how they can work more hand in glove to ensure that the most important systems are as secure as they possibly can be.
I mean, Melissa, is there resistance from these corporations to working hand in glove, as Siobhan says? I mean, it seems to me if I were running a big corporation, I'd welcome government help in somehow in protecting my computer systems.
Well, I think that there's a careful balance of private entities are private and they're about making profit, and the government is about ensuring essential services and the protection of its citizens. It's not about ensuring profit. The private-public partnership is probably the most difficult thing to move forward, and the government will have to look at different market levers to incentivize the private sector to build the security into the infrastructures that need to be done for our overall national and economic security.
What do you mean by market lever? Pay them to do things?
Market levers can be anything from a tax incentive to a regulatory environment. Our telecommunication systems are already regulated. However, our internet service is not regulated.
Jeff, you raised some skepticism about really how dangerous this threat is, making the point that a lot of the players who could destroy computer systems really want them to be operating. Is there something else operating here which is kind of a mutually assured destruction? In other words, if the Chinese, say, do something to the American electric grid, we could do something to them.
You could, but like Melissa pointed out, you've got to know it's them.
Right.
And attribution online is very difficult, especially against a clever adversary. Against maybe a low-level organized crime group, maybe it's easier to ascertain their true location, but against a clever nation state, I don't think you'd have a whole lot of luck with 100% certainty. I mean, it's not the same as during the Cold War, looking across the horizon, seeing a missile rise out of Russia and say, aha, that's who's about to...
But is there a way to put fingerprints on another actor, or maybe have some sort of protocol?
Yes, you can correlate, and so it's like when I'm talking to people about this, I say it's not like you can on CSI you hit a button and aha, look, they're attacking us. I think it's going to be more like traditional detective work. You'll have packet traces that say it looks like it came from, for example, China. You'll have people on the ground that'll say there's activity in the building. You'll have an informant that'll say, yes, Professor so-and-so went into the building. And you'll correlate this together and you'll say there's a high degree of certainty that the attack came from, for example, China. But I get nervous when people say there's a magic button you press and it'll absolutely tell us where the attack came from.
I agree with Jeff, and I think that we should, as countries, I'm hearing at least more of, as opposed to this more of the mutual assured destruction, it's more of the mutually assured survivability.
Yeah.
And how are we going to ensure that our infrastructures can survive a degradation or an attack, no matter where it came from, and with or without attribution?
Siobhan, you cover intelligence in general beyond this area. Do we have an intelligence apparatus that's looking at, I don't know, that we keep picking on the Chinese, but the Chinese or the Russians or the Iranians, to see what they're doing, not just the electronic signals, but what individual actors might be doing?
Certainly that's part of it, and I think that one of the big elements of kind of the post 9/11 intelligence reforms was trying to find out how best to combine the resources that we already have in our intelligence services. The National Security Agency is going to be collecting electronic information. The Central Intelligence Agency is going to be collecting information from its own human sources. And you have mapping, you have all kinds of information that's being collected. And I think that certainly with the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative, that has driven a lot of elements of government, including the intelligence agencies, or perhaps in some cases especially the intelligence agencies, to try to focus on what they call, some of these hard problems.
And how does this threat fit in with other national security threats? I mean, are we spending enough money on cybersecurity, for example, compared to other kinds of security?
I think that there is not adequate funding in this particular area because the capabilities have not been developed over time. We've largely ignored the security of our core infrastructure from an electronic perspective and our enterprises. And I think that as we're moving forward, part of the resourcing strategy is not only building capabilities, but it's training people and it's communicating the problem in a way that people can understand it, both the American people, corporate America, and the people who are charged with securing our core enterprises.
But you talk about capabilities. I mean, there is a kind of a gold rush going on, some people would say, among contractors. I mean, there is a lot of money being spent compared to what was spent before. I mean, is that an indication that this is a much higher priority?
Certainly at the end of the Bush administration, President Bush and his administration made this a significant priority. And while we were working that program, we received bipartisan support from both chambers of Congress, and they funded the initiative almost at 85% of the request of what the administration put in, which was a significant amount. Congress continues to fund the requests that were put forward in the President Obama's administration. However, I think that there's still more funding that needs to be allocated in particular areas. How much money are we talking about? How much money
is being spent now?
Well, it depends on how you think about it. Just the IT budget alone is $80 billion a year, of which a percentage of the administration's IT budget has a set aside for security.
Do you know, Siobhan, how much money is being spent by the government on cybersecurity?
Well, the challenge is that it combines the budgets of agencies like the Department of Homeland Security with the budgets of agencies like the National Security Agency, which is classified. But I was told that it was roughly $17 billion that the administration got, I believe, at the end of the Bush administration. And that was over several years. I think it was probably a 5-year or so period. And I think that the people who were pressing for that funding at the time were still considering it kind of a down payment. But that was kind of the initial commitment that the executive branch could get from Congress.
Do you think, Jeff, this money is being spent wisely?
Well, let me back up just a little bit. I think the Google versus China incident was the best thing that could happen from a public awareness standpoint. I think we had more discussion in Congress about cybersecurity since that became public. I think that's really moved the ball.
Not that it's moved any legislation.
No, it hasn't, but I think it started the conversation finally. But
was that about security, or was that more about privacy, for example,
well, it's a crystal ball.
Freedom?
It's about whatever you want it to be about. It could be about privacy, it could be about human rights, it could be about...
But why is it about security?
Well, because the penetrations that came in because of the 0-day, which is unbeknownst to anybody before the day that it was used, vulnerability within a particular software program was exploited, and that enabled a backdoor into a number of different companies, many of which were targeted very specifically. And whether it's 30 or it's 100 or a recent number that I heard was 2,100, there were a lot of companies affected. And at least one company filed in their SEC filing under a reportable risk, the 10K, that they had been penetrated as a result of this Google Aurora incident. They had lost information, and even some of their product line might have been compromised.
Mm-hmm. Well, and see, what it does is it forces people to debate, is it a national security issue? Was it China versus a US company? Is it a domestic law enforcement issue? Is it an intelligence issue? Is it a military issue? It really grows into stark relief, like the problems we have in dealing with these issues right now.
And the interesting thing was that I think the answer to that question was all of the above. I mean, you saw the State Department involved, you saw the National Security Agency involved, you saw all these government entities involved that Google probably would generally want to keep somewhat at bay. But because it obviously ended up involving something that wasn't just, you know, hacker against Google, you saw that there was a broader interest that the nation had.
But with all of these different interests and with all these government agencies involved, I mean, does that cast some doubt about whether Cyber Czar can be effective? I mean, this is...
I think the Cyber Czar can try to untangle this and help set standards in the future. So the next time this happens, it's a little bit easier to deal with.
Right. I think that the cyber security coordinator really, that is their job, is to help put the best players on the field to handle whatever issue. And whether it's the FBI from a counterintelligence and law enforcement perspective, or the Department of Homeland Security in helping inform corporate America of what's happening, or the core expertise of the National Security Agency looking at it from an information assurance investigation, that really is the person who's at the White House. And the White House is the only place that you have total visibility into what all of the departments and agencies have and can bring to the table.
But you know, one of the things that I've learned in my time in government is that none of this works, no matter where the person is situated, unless the president himself sets a very high priority on something, because the president has so many other things to do. And it's an indication to the bureaucracy that this is a top priority of mine. Is this president doing that?
I think that this president, as he campaigned with cybersecurity, that it was a top priority. He asked for the cyberspace policy review. That was delivered. The current White House is working on the action plan that was articulated in the cyberspace policy review. I think it is one of the priorities, but it's one of many.
What would you say to that? Is it a high priority? I mean, is the fact that it's taken, here we are a year and a half into the administration, and really there's not a lot of activity on this front.
Right. Part of it is just the Washington expectations game, because President Obama did include some discussion of this in his campaign. He even ran an ad that included a component of cybersecurity. It was a broader national security related campaign ad. He commissioned a group during his transition to look at cybersecurity issues. Then he asked Melissa and her team to look at cybersecurity issues. And then he gave this much heralded speech last May, well, now a year ago, last May, on, you know, declaring it a critical economic and national security issue. And then there was this long lull. And it's not really that clear what the White House is doing on cybersecurity at this point. I mean, there was some discussion in October because that was National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, but it was very general.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, and it didn't have any specific policies sort of as components of it. And what was interesting was during the Google China discussion, most of that seemed to be handled out of the State Department, at least in terms of the public face. And that may well be appropriate, but it didn't lead to a perception of the White House cybersecurity office really taking hold and dealing with these issues.
So what does the cyber community think of all this? Is there a certain amount of excitement about the fact that this has become a big issue, or is it? Or do you feel like this lull that Siobhan is talking about is
I think there's an acknowledgement that you do need somebody. You need a coordinator of some sort. And ideally, it would be more of like a cabinet level position. Somebody with some real authority that can it's listened to, that carries around a little bit of a stick that they can pull out if they have to. And that hasn't happened yet.
So what do we need? Do we need a major cyber attack to effectuate something?
Well, so a couple of things. People seem to learn through pain.
Right.
Right? So maybe we need to suffer some pain until people take this seriously. And I'm hoping that the Google and related announcements will raise the threshold so that we don't have to suffer a major, catastrophic electronic Pearl Harbor, I've heard it referred to as. I mean, that would not be a good way to learn, because some of these systems would take a long time to get back up and running. But I think what's happening is, at least with this president, it ran a very effective online campaign. They're very aware of the power of the internet. And I think you see the staffers in Congress, they're very aware now. They're all plugged in. And I think what's happening is it's moving its way through government now. It's, you know, maybe 10 years behind. And it's finally getting to a point now where we see some visible movement. And that's exciting, because now it's starting to happen.
If there is such an attack, predict what it would be like.
If there were an attack that could take down, say, a third of the electric grid, economists who have worked through this have found that you're probably looking at least $1 trillion of damage to the economy, and that's not even looking at sort of the cascading effects. And so I think that's the kind of thing that has people worried, because an attack that could take out a wide swath of the electric grid has both national security and economic implications, and that's what really worries people.
And on that note, thank you, Siobhan. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, Melissa. Before we go, I want to remind viewers that you can watch Ideas in Action whenever and wherever you want. Just go to our website to watch complete episodes or download podcasts to your MP3 player through the iTunes Store. Wherever you watch, be sure to join us next time. That's it for this episode. For Ideas in Action, I'm Jim Glassman.
For more information, visit us at ideasinactiontv.com. Funding for Ideas in Action is provided by Investors Business Daily. Every stock market cycle is led by America's never-ending stream of innovative new companies and inventions. Investors Business Daily helps investors find these new leaders as they emerge. More information is available at investors.com. This program is a production of Grace Creek Media and the George W. Bush Institute, which are solely responsible for its content.